Carbohydrate-rich foods and drinks you should try to avoid if you're following a low-carb diet. Let's dive in. The first group to avoid is, of course, sugary foods and drinks. I'm talking about things like candies, sweets, donuts, cakes, jams, and cookies. Adding sugar to your food or drinks where you're clearly consuming sugar, and the same goes for sugary beverages like sodas, carbonated drinks, and energy drinks. Remember that an average soda can has over 9 teaspoons of sugar. Now, these are all obvious sources of refined carbohydrates, but it's the hidden places where sugar seems to sneak in that catch most people. Number 2, fat equals foods. Fat equals flavor, and when fat is removed from foods that should contain fat, they often taste terrible. Food manufacturers often circumvent this by adding sugars to replace the missing flavor, which means that foods marketed as diet, low-fat, or healthy are actually full of sugar. The third is salad dressings. Now, salads are a classic healthy food and for good reasons. They're great for low-carb and keto diets, but be aware of what can be added to ready-made salad dressings you buy at the supermarket, especially watch out for glazes. By the way, it's very easy to make your own salad dressings. Just mix 3 parts olive oil with 1 part vinegar, and you have a basic vinaigrette without hidden sugars. Be especially mindful of salad dressings labeled as low-fat, as they often contain a lot of sugar. Number 4 is gluten-free products. Avoiding grains, most people living a low-carb lifestyle are naturally gluten-free. Be aware that gluten-free doesn't necessarily mean low-carb. In fact, many of these products are actually quite high in carbohydrates. Number 5 is legumes. Legumes are a family of plants that include beans, lentils, and peas, and while they're a great source of protein and the carbohydrates in these legumes are absorbed quite slowly by the body, if you're really cutting down on carbs, most legumes need to be off the shopping list, like chickpeas, which are very high in carbs compared to peas, which are much lower in carbs and can be consumed in moderation in all but the most restrictive low-carb diets. Number 6, milk. Milk contains lactose, which is, of course, a sugar, and lactose is rapidly converted into glucose in the body and thus should be considered high in carbohydrates. Remember those lattes, cappuccinos, and other beverages primarily made with milk, which should be avoided. If you're adding a small splash of milk to 2 or 3 coffees a day, you should be fine. But if you're using a lot of milk in 7 or 8 cups a day, you're probably consuming a fair amount of carbohydrates just from the milk itself. Number 7, sauces and condiments. Now, some sauces are clearly sweet, for example, ketchup, barbecue sauce, teriyaki, and hoisin, so you'll easily identify those, and you might think a list of these is okay, but these sources can be loaded with sugar. And the flavors can also be deceptive, as even if they're not clearly sweet, that doesn't necessarily mean they're sugar-free. Commercially prepared sauces are often loaded with sugar to enhance flavor. Think of things like tomato sauce and bolognese sauces. Number 8, fruits. Now, fruits are often labeled as healthy, but fruits can have a wide range of carbohydrate content. For example, a medium banana has the equivalent of almost 6 teaspoons of sugar, while the same portion of watermelon contains less than 2 teaspoons. But compare that with the same portion of strawberries, which has less than half a teaspoon of sugar. So, when it comes to reducing carbs, we can't simply lump all fruits together and say they're low carb. You have to learn a bit more about the different carbohydrate contents of different fruits. In particular, I just ask you to be mindful of more tropical fruits like bananas, mangoes, pineapples, and the like. Be especially mindful of dried fruits too, like raisins, currants, apricots, and dates. Number 9 is grains and cereals. This is, of course, a well-known area to avoid in low-carb diets, but there are still some common mistakes I see in this area, and when I say grains and cereals, I'm talking about things like wheat, corn, rice, oats, barley, etc. The things used to produce breads, pastas, and breakfast cereals. All of these contain a lot of starch, and starch is just long chains of glucose molecules all stuck together, and these chains eventually break down into glucose, so starch is just another form of carbohydrate. Number 10, starchy vegetables. So, people often know to avoid potatoes on a low-carb diet. The average 150-gram serving of potato has the equivalent of 9 teaspoons of sugar. Other starchy vegetables to avoid include sweet potatoes, which have similar carbohydrate content to potatoes, but also cassava or yuca, which has about double the carbohydrate content of potatoes. Number 11. Beer. Any alcohol is always going to slow down or halt weight loss on a diet, but there are definitely some alcohols that are higher in carbohydrates than others. One to watch is beer, which has the apt nickname of liquid toast. And of course, there are hundreds of different brands of beer, all with varying amounts of carbohydrates, and you can find low-carb beers too.